Welcome to Jake's Rolex World. I'm here with Cameron, who's live at Watches and Wonders in Geneva, Switzerland. How you doing, Cam?
Hey Jake, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Great. I've been blogging like
So
a
just
madman.
I can imagine. I can imagine reporting live on behalf of Rolex Magazine.
How was your meeting with Rolex?
It was great. We saw all the new novelties for 2024 here at Watches and Wonders. Saw some really interesting stuff and was a really exciting meeting overall.
Wow. What stood out for you?
Um, I think my favorite and the most interesting piece, I would say, I mean, they're all kind of my favorites. It's like picking a child, they're all so cool and interesting. But I would say the most interesting novelty from my perspective this year was the deep sea, which we were discussing is an independent line of its own now. So the yellow gold 44 millimeter deep sea, really beautiful watch, blue dial, and there was some pretty interesting tech happening with the deep sea. I also really loved, um, the new GMT. I thought it was a very tasteful and elegant way to uh, kind of kind of do something different. Um, there really hasn't been any kind of nickname assigned to the piece yet, but when I was in the booth, I said, this kind of looks like the Dark Knight, and Rolex kind of chuckled and said, that kind of makes sense. It's a play on you know Batman, obviously, but kind of in its own way, as it has a darker, kind of more Dark Knight esque type of colorway. And I think the other great thing about the GMT is that um, it comes on two different bracelet options. You can get it on an Oyster or Jubilee. And I love the green accent on the 24-hour hand, and GMT Master 2 is in green. I think it's just a nice, subtle touch, but I think it really works with kind of the more subdued and gray colorways of the bezel.
My take on that watch is it's an alternative to them bringing back the all black bezel insert because in certain light, it really looks like it's all black.
Yeah, I'll shortly you'll have the photos. The watch actually plays nicely in the light. There's actually a definitive differentiation between the kind of black and the gray elements of the dial, and then of course the bezel has a PVD platinum inlay. So the bezel actually does have a bit of depth and dimension, and I also kind of think that if you look back at, say, the original no crown guard GMT, you had that depth and dimension in the bezel, the Bakelite bezel. You kind of now get that in a modern form with, the PVD inlays on Rolex's Cerachrome bezel offering. So I think it's a very tasteful offering. But it kind of does play in the light a little bit. It kind of is, dark in some instances and then very bright in others. But there is definitely a difference between the black portion and the gray portion. And I actually did talk with Rolex about kind of the original black GMT offering, which was the first ceramic GMT. I believe the reference is a BLNR, which also has the green accent, similar to what we're seeing here with the new release.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Is it to me? It's like a updated version of that to like a certain extent.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm certain you haven't seen it yet, but Rolex came out with a 6 minute long documentary on the history of the GMT, where they showed off some really, really cool stuff that nobody's ever seen before, which is pretty cool. Did
Yeah,
you?
definitely.
I know you went by the Tudor booth. Did you see the new Coke?
I did, yeah. I haven't had it in hand yet. That's on our next list of appointments here at Watches and Wonders. But I actually quite liked that new Tudor release a bit. It was very interesting. It's the new GMT Black Bay 58 GMT rather, and it's a very interesting kind of Coke color. It's not really like a bright, vibrant red. It's more of like a Bordeaux or kind of like a wine red. It's very cool. Um, and I think that that's a watch that really kind of plays, uh, to the enthusiast community, more the vintage enthusiast, and kind of has that almost no crown Rolex GMT vibe and feel while still being very much Tudor.
Yeah, Tudor's looking good for the fifth year in a row.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, they have some really cool releases.
did you what about the new 1908 with the Cloisonné dial? I mean the
That
cool.
was very cool. You'll have some pictures of that here in a moment. But the thing that is so amazing about the 1908 line is obviously I think it was a transition away from the Cellini line of watches. But I think in talking with Rolex today, I think what was very much apparent is the 1908 line to me, and based on what I'm seeing, is Rolex's ability to display masterful and artful watchmaking. And I think the guilloche dial, they call it like grains of rice. The guilloche is unlike anything that I've really ever seen before. It's not a traditional guilloche by any means. It has kind of this like grains of rice type of look to the guilloche, which is very fine at the bottom of the dial where the running seconds subdial is, and then it ultimately kind of gets a little bit larger as you move up to the top portion of the dial, kind of almost giving it like this like rising sun kind of look, if that makes sense.
It's
um,
like
you know
MC Escher meets Rising Sun.
Yeah, it's really cool. The one thing that I think is also really interesting is if you look at the outer minute track of the dial, you have this like scalloping guilloche effect that is beautiful. The first At first glance, I thought it was like a reflection coming off of the crystal, but there's
Mhm.
actually, these kind of two independent like lines of guilloche that like kind of encapsulate the dial.
I see
And
it. Yeah.
I actually looped it, and the finishing and attention to detail is unlike anything that I've seen. The hand finishing, the dial finishing, it's just out of this world. And I think to that point, the 1908 line is a way for Rolex to display fine watchmaking, even though you can kind of see that and say some of like the day dates or maybe the gem set pieces. This is really fine horology at the next level, leveraging classic and more traditional watchmaking like a guilloche dial, while also leveraging kind of the cutting edge of like Rolex and horological tech.
Yeah, it's and that ice blue is gorgeous.
Yeah, and that's a color that we see kind of Rolex leverage in the platinum cases. So the case is platinum, and it kind of is that a similar colorway to like the platinum Daytona, where you have that like icy blue dial. But it's definitely a very pleasing blue. It's very subtle, and what's wild about it is the way that blue kind of interacts with the guilloche finishing on the dial. It's really unlike anything else I've ever seen before.
So you mentioned that with the deep sea is now a freestanding new, not new, but a freestanding Rolex model in and of itself, and it no longer carries the Sea Dweller designation.
That is correct. Yeah. So if you look closely at the dial, you'll basically just see, deep sea, and we'll see the absence of sea dweller. And in talking with Rolex, this was kind of their way of ultimately putting that model into a category of its own within the brand. Now, obviously, if you look at the piece, you'll see a helium escape valve. You'll see a micro adjust bracelet that kind of has that diver's extension. It's definitely tool watch, but I think also the introduction of this, maybe kind of pillar or vertical within the Rolex product catalog. I think the yellow gold case is a way for Rolex to kind of mark maybe the departure of the deep sea away from the sea dweller, and kind of mark this as a way of this kind of standing as its own pillar within the Rolex catalog entirely. And I think if we look back at, Rolex and how the Sea Dweller kind of was an evolution of the Submariner, um, I think this is kind of an interesting piece of Rolex history where this is kind of becoming its own pillar within the product offering from the brand.
And how heavy was it?
It was a weighty watch, that's for sure. Rolex definitely doesn't skimp on the usage of gold. That's for sure. So it's a solid piece. It's very elegant, and it's definitely gold. That is a watch that lets its presence on your wrist be known for sure.
And the retail
I think
on it, what's the retail on it?
the retail on it is 49,900 CHF.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of gold.
I wonder if that's the heaviest gold Rolex ever made.
It's gotta be. I mean, the Platinum Daytona, it was a heavy watch for sure, but I mean, this I think is giving the Platona, if we want to call it that, a definite run for the money in terms of the weight category.
And I'm noticing it has a titanium helium release valve and case back.
It does, yeah. So Rolex is kind of referring to this as almost a tri-colored watch. So you have the blue lacquer dial, the blue Cerachrome bezel insert, and then you have the yellow gold case. But there's also a third tone of color, which is kind of the, almost gray or taupey kind of look of titanium, which this watch does have a titanium case back as well as a titanium helium escape valve.
So it's like a very subtle tritone.
Yeah, it's like a subtle tritone. Basically, there's three colors to the watch. It's not just a monochromatic case. It's basically three colors being blue for the dial and the bezel, gold or yellow for the case, and then the titanium color for the case back and the helium escape valve.
It's so strange to see the rehaut in blue with gold text on it. It's so unusual
Yeah,
looking.
Rolex was actually talking about the rehaut or the ring lock system in the underneath the sapphire crystal and kind of being implemented in there. Rolex actually had to come up with a very, very specific material to create that blue coloration, for the ring lock system, and it's not actually just like a ceramic. It's a very specific material that Rolex had formulated to yield and strength and ultimately durability for the pretty insane depth rating of the piece.
And did you hear that they discontinued the Yachtmaster too?
I did hear that. It wasn't confirmed when I was there. Granted, we didn't ask, but I did hear that they discontinued the Yachtmaster 2, and it was not in the showcases here at the show.
And I sent you that a photo earlier today of a yellow gold Le Mans.
Yes.
And
So there
did
is
you?
rumors currently around the discontinuation of the white gold Le Mans, but they there is a lot of buzz and speculation that they're going to release a yellow gold Le Mans, which is kind of an interesting take on the Le Mans and for the Daytona, as you have the steel Paul Newman Daytonas, and then you also have the yellow gold John Player Special Paul Newman Daytonas as well. So I think it is really cool. I'm hoping that they release it, and if they do, I think it would be a great, kind of homage to the history of the Paul Newman Daytona, the Daytona range as a whole, and ultimately a nice progression for the Le Mans range of Daytona.
What were your thoughts on the 36 and 40 millimeter day date?
I like them a lot. The dial configuration that stood out the most to me was the slate ombre dial that you see in the 40 millimeter rose gold case. The execution of the dial is just beautiful. It kind of has this almost like fume kind of smoky vibe to the slate of the undertone of the dial, and the gradient tone is just amazing. I did talk with Rolex about kind of the historical reverence of that as it relates to the vignette dials that we saw kind of come out of the 1980s, where they were doing that kind of fume or type of vignette in the blue and in the reds and in those colorways. So it's definitely kind of a nod to the past, but definitely in an uplifted way. I also think that in both of in the date range, in the both in the 40 and in the 36, the gem set markers are actually baguettes, which is a very cool way to display stones on the dial. Normally, what you'll see a baguette at the 6 o'clock and the 9 o'clock marker, but in this case, it has a very pleasing and kind of almost rare look to it as it relates to all of the markers being baguettes around the outside of the dial.
You know what it reminds me
Um,
of, and I think I saw it in your office, is that I think it was like a 1971 Rolex Platinum day date ad comparing it to a Porsche Targa.
yeah,
Didn't that have a baguette?
Yes. So with the early platinum day dates, there's a couple little interesting elements to note. One, platinum is the most noble of all of the precious metals. So, uh, that watch at the time cost basically as much as a Porsche. And the other thing that was really interesting about that specific watch is the gems that they used on the dial for the platinum watches are actually quite a bit larger for the platinum offering, whereas in a white gold or a yellow gold, they're a little bit smaller. So Rolex chose to use larger stones for the platinum case versions of those watches in the past, making them quite unique, even though it's a bit of a subtle difference.
So did you see the rose gold day date with the kind of like aqua green dial?
I did, yeah. So it's kind of a blue green dial. It actually looks very beautiful in the rose gold case. I think that color plays nicely with the rose gold case or the Ever Rose case. Um, the dial color is very similar to the dial color that they released last year with the Sky Dweller. So it kind of has this like nice kind of blue tone. At first, it kind of reminded me of like the color that you would see like in a Milgauss, where it kind of has that like blue kind of metallic sunray type finish. But it's really not. It's really kind of a color onto itself that we haven't really seen before, maybe outside of the Sky Dweller. The other thing is the stone setting on that bezel is trapezoidal. So the stone setting is beautiful in the way that each stone kind of fits onto itself to form the circular type of, I guess, shape that would ultimately be needed to surround the dial in a bezel format. But the stones are these trapezoidal stones that encompass the dial, and it's absolutely beautiful.
I can't, when I first saw it, like immediately, just like that, there's something familiar about it to me, and I can't figure out what it is. I mean, it
The
looks really
color,
cool. Is it the color?
I
No,
think it could be the color.
it's some, to me, I thought it was some, yeah, the color, but also those baguette, large markers just remind me of something. I can't figure out what the hell it is.
Yeah, that one's really cool. And then the other day date that really caught my attention, and I think the cool thing about like the day dates and even the Daytonas that were released this year is, the changes aren't like vast and wild. They're very subtle and nuanced, but I think that's ultimately what makes them so special. We saw another white gold day date with what they are calling a pearlized mother of pearl dial, and essentially there's kind of this like bubbly kind of like almost like cloud like effect to the mother of pearl, And at first, I was calling it just a mother of pearl dial, and Rolex corrected me and said that this is pearlized mother of pearl. And as I started to look closer at the dial, I noticed that it is actually quite a bit different than just your standard MOP. The dial has this very dimensional and kind of rich effect to it. Very, very stunning, especially in person, because the mother of pearl has kind of this depth and almost 3D look to it that you really don't see in standard, mother of pearl.
I'm
So
looking
that
at it
was
right
something
now,
that
and I
was,
see what you're talking about.
yeah, that was something that was surprising and kind of, missable, I would say. It, it's something that's very special, and I think Rolex is, to my knowledge, the first person to leverage this part of the mother of pearl, because mother of pearl is a shell. So this uh, place of the shell in which the MOP is harvested to use for the dials is a very specific spot, and I think it's not often that you see this type of element within the shell that would ultimately form the dial. So I think that is pretty unique onto itself as it relates to Rolex being one of the first people, to really offer this, type of dial in a watch format.
It looks like three-dimensional clouds to me when I look at it.
Yeah, like maybe like billowing smoke or clouds or something like that. Has like a
Exactly.
very organic, beautiful shape, but in the hand, the watch is just crazy dimensional. The dial has a beautiful appearance. And I also think the fact that they chose a white metal case for that is also very interesting, due to the fact that it kind of allows the dial to speak for itself. I think if you were to put this type of dial in, say, a rose gold case or a yellow gold case, it could maybe detract from the beauty of the dial. Whereas, in a white metal case, it really allows the dial to kind of jump out at you without losing any type of substantiality to the case itself.
So it's kind of like a champagne dial on a 36-day date, but this is like the silver bullet version of
Yeah,
it. Did
that was really eye catching. I mean, I'm just kind of coming out of the meeting, and my head is spinning, right? Because we saw so many amazing things, but each offering, each novelty this year has an element of uniqueness that is really unlike anything else that we've seen from Rolex. And I think what is so cool about that is it's not something that's necessarily like, so far off the beaten path, right? I think people want to be like wowed and surprised and just really knocked on their butts. But ultimately, I think that this is uh, an element of like being subtle and creative and generating pieces that really pull you into them, which I, really enjoyed as part of my experience meeting with Rolex.
did you see the rainbow dial with the diamond inset?
The mother of pearl dial,
Yes,
on the day date or the Daytona.
on the day date.
I did not see that.
Oh, okay.
Are you talking about? I'm trying to think. There were four that we viewed, and granted, we had a.
I have it up on the screen. Do you see it?
I do, yeah. Oh, are you talking about the pave dial with the rainbow gradient?
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. That wasn't there. And one of the things that we were talking about is I think Rolex is kind of like quietly releasing these things over the course of the show. I think it's, in traditional fashion to have the opening of the fair, all the novelties get presented, and then it's kind of like a big surprise, and then it goes out. I think Rolex has a really interesting strategy this year, in which they are kind of throughout the show releasing different things, which is really exciting because it makes me want to go back. It makes me want to spend a little bit more time. It makes me more interested, which I think is a really cool thing to do, instead of just kind of like throwing everything out on the table all at once.
And here's up on screen now. I have that rose gold date
The
that you
pave.
were with the blue dial with the baguette
Yes.
markers.
yeah, that was really cool. Personally for me, I couldn't wear a 40 millimeter watch. My wrists are a little bit too
Couldn't?
small for that. I could
Really?
not. Yeah, I
Okay.
probably could, but I think for me personally, and this is just me personally, I think everybody's wrist is shaped a little bit different. But I like the way that a 36 millimeter wears on my wrist. I think it allows for the watch to have a little bit more of a presence and kind of some breathing room around it. Whereas the 40 on my wrist just looks a little bit too overbearing. But again, I have smaller wrists, so I think that's kind of the cool thing with Rolex having the day date in the 40 and in the traditional size of 36.
Do you know what size wrist you have?
I have a 6.75-inch wrist.
So do I.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I'm a big dude with like broad shoulders, but with like I have small wrists though. Which is
What's funny about wrists that I've noticed is some of the biggest, like burliest dudes I've met throughout my career in watches have like very dainty and elegant wrists. So it's interesting that your wrist size doesn't necessarily correlate to like your body mass, because I've met a bunch of guys who are you know pretty stacked, and they have pretty elegant and dainty wrists.
yeah, like the fastest thoroughbred racehorses have the smallest uh the skinniest legs.
Legs, like,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, interesting.
Uh so did you also see the Sky Dweller?
I did see the Sky Dweller. Yeah, it was really interesting. Rose gold, um, beautiful execution. I think that that's kind of the fun thing with Sky Dwellers is if I look at what makes something collectible over the long term, it's definitely variance in the range, right? If we look at the Datejust or the Day Date or the Submariner or any of those pieces, what makes them ultimately celebrated and very much collectible is the fact that there's all these different variants. And I think what's cool about the Sky Dweller is that we see a good number of variants within the reference range now, right? We have different case sizes, we have different dial formats, we have different case materials. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to maybe start considering now with the Sky Dweller, is that we have a lot of different options. And I think that makes them unique and ultimately, interesting. But um, was a beautiful dial. I like this kind of play with this kind of grayish taupey ombre kind of like vibe to the dials that you're seeing appear in some of the rose gold cases that are coming from Rolex.
I have the Deep Sea up on the screen right now, with that really interesting blue rehaut that you mentioned,
Yes.
and it looks so unusual, just saying Deep Sea and not Sea Dweller at the same time.
I think it's kind of cool, actually. And I think, if we look back at history, as, the Sea Dweller was a kind of a part of, the Submariner. It was a variant of the Submariner, especially based on the technical specifications of the watch as it was originally introduced. I think that this is kind of a cool, I think this is almost like history unfolding in front of us as it relates to a model now being its own pillar within the Rolex catalog of product offerings.
Yeah,
But
it's formally a
I
Submariner variant now
right,
instead of a Sea Dweller variant. Um, wow, yeah, that's it. It has a King Tut vibe too, with the black. I mean, sorry, with the cobalt blue, all that cobalt
yeah,
blue and the gold. That's cool.
yeah, definitely. And I like how they retained, kind of the fully gradiated 60-minute bezel, which is kind of a carryover from what you would see in the Sea Dwellers. Like the Sea Dweller 4K had that same, same type of fully gradiated bezel, which I think is really cool and interesting. And I think you can see carryover from the Sea Dweller into now the Deep Sea, which I really love, because I think it tells the story. It displays the lineage of the model, and is also very aesthetically pleasing to the eye, and also serves a bit of a function.
And you mentioned you're going to be going back on Thursday. Did you say
Friday? Yep.
Friday? That should be interesting.
Yes. Yeah, we'll see if Rolex releases more things throughout the week. Definitely going to provide coverage and data points on what Rolex is hopefully going to be releasing. I'm definitely satisfied with what Rolex has released. We talked about the 1908. That was really a watch that pulled me in. I wish I could have spent more time with that one, just because, you know, details on details, but I digress. I think as Rolex might continue to release different pieces throughout the week, I think it'll be interesting to go back and visit them after these pieces have been released, to hopefully spend some time with them.
Yeah, yeah. No, I have that up on the screen right now. I don't know if you can see it, but you saw that crazy detail that you were mentioning in the Kilosh dial.
Yeah, and it's interesting. They're calling it like uh, the grains of rice, or the beads of rice, but I think it's more like grains of rice style.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing all your insight.
Yeah, this was great, Jake, and going to be going back on Friday. So if Rolex releases any additional novelties, we'll be sure to report on that for Rolex Magazine. And stay tuned. Have a bunch of images and additional pieces of content coming your way shortly.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jake. See you soon.
See you soon.